Second material is chartreuse bucktail. And we're going to apply half a dozen strands of chartreuse crystal flash to each side. Capture that thread from the rear. Tie it down so that it lands on either side. Bit of lacquer. Third material is olive bucktail. Lacquered well. The final step on the wing is an application of 5 or 6 strands of peacock herl. I generally like to take them fresh off the stalk. They seem to be a little bit more full than a strung herl, and it just creates a fuller effect on the topping. These are usually tied slightly longer than the bucktail if you can. Okay, and they are applied directly on top. Hold them up so they're bound down and tied directly on top. Snip off the butts. Okay. And here again, I'm using this white thread. I want these colors to bleed through right to the eye of the hook. So I'm using as few wraps as possible to allow that. Okay. We're whip finished. And when this is lacquered, those colors will bleed through, and instead of having an abrupt end or change in color at the head of the fly, you'll have a nice white underneath, and peacock herl above the olive, and the chartreuse will bleed through on the top. And there's your first coat of lacquer, and you'll probably need a couple more later. And it's nice to have these herl kind of curve down and sweep, so we just do the ribbon type thing, like so. That usually gives them a nice curve. And I've got a little bit of lacquer in that eye. I'm just going to run a saddle hackle right down through the eye of the hook. That's cleaned out anything that's in the eye. That completes the deceiver. The rotary flatwing is a concept in tying much as the lefty deceiver is. This is a very, very sparsely tied fly incorporating a flat saddle in the tail area. This is a method of tying that was first showed to me by Kenny Abrams of Providence, Rhode Island. And I have changed this around a little bit to suit myself. Kenny incorporates quite a few saddle in the tail area, sometimes up to 6. I, in fact, use 1. The first step on tying this fly is to incorporate the tail portion which will be tied in about 4 steps. The first being a small amount of white bucktail tied as an apron or a skirt. And this can be a very small amount, probably about 4 dozen hair or less. And it's tied on. This is being a 2/0 hook. I'm going to use this particular joint in the vise as a point to tie this in. That'll be just about twice the length of the hook itself. First material at the tail area is tied on and flared. And that's about 1 to 1.5 times the length of the hook shank. Second material is my longest white bucktail. Just a few fibers. It's tied onto a point ending just above the post of my vise. And lacquered. The next step is one flat saddle hackle tied about at least 3/4 the length of that tail area. Pinch that with my right thumb and kind of shroud the hook with my left hand, thumb and forefinger, and fasten so that that saddle lies flat. If anything, when I tie this on, I want it to be leaning toward me a little bit because the torque caused by wrapping the thread will probably bring that onto the top of the hook. And the fourth step in the tail section is a small amount of flash. And I'd like to use probably 3 pieces of pearlescent Flashaboo. And probably 2 pieces of either gold or copper colored Flashaboo. Okay. These are tied in to extend about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch beyond the white hair in this tail section. And this creates a real flashy movement at the far end of the fly, which represents the tail of the baitfish. Okay. These are tied in, and if the ends are all about the same length, you can clip them back so that they stagger, which is kind of important. I'm going to bring my thread forward to a point about 1/4 of an inch behind the eye of the hook. Lacquer well. I'm going to add a body of pearlescent body braid. I'm going to invert this hook and tie what I call a collar, and I'm going to tie this in 2 steps, almost like the Lefty Deceiver. This incorporates a collar, but the bottom part on the flat wing is tied very sparse and to about the point of the white bucktail that we put in the tail area first. which is about 1.5 inches or an inch beyond the bend of the hook. So I want to gauge the length of that hair. And here again, we're talking about 3 dozen hairs. Not a lot, this is sparse. Okay, captured with a couple of light wraps. Split the point of the hook, center it up, and press down with my thumb, which spreads this over the bottom half of the hook. Okay. Turn this hook back up into the traditional position. The first section of the wing area, it's a modest amount of white bucktail tied along. Hopefully as long as the feather, which this will reach. Again, we crush that down so that it covers the top half of the hook. And pick it out a little. Some lacquer. Next will be yellow bucktail. Spread them to integrate with the white. Then blue, about half as much as the yellow, and this tied in such a way as to integrate with the yellow and the white. And at this point we're going to add some crystal flash. In this case, chartreuse, 4 or 5 strands. Okay, and the final bucktail portion is olive. And this olive should integrate with all the top colors of the wing. And finally, 4 or 5 strands of peacock herl. Tied in directly on top. Okay, capture the thread with the back of your fingers, loop it, bring that intersection against the head, go back, splitting the hook and underneath, back splitting the hook and underneath. To the rear, splitting the hook and underneath. Minimum of 3, a maximum of 5 times. Snips off. This fly is called a calico or a lady crab, and it's really more of a building procedure than a tying procedure. It's something that I learned from a tyer from Belgium. His name is Ron Lazen, and actually I learned the process or the theory behind it and adapted this to duplicating the lady crab, which is prolific in our waters early in the season. To put this together, I first coat this hook with about 4 layers of thread, back and forth, leaving the thread just above the barb of the hook on the tail end. The body or the mold of this fly is merely a piece of paper, and I'm going to cut it in the shape of a crab. And I want this to be the length of the shank, if we can show it like so. And I'm going to cut this to the shape of a crab, which is not entirely round and not entirely oval, but again, something like so. I'm going to put a slit in the front with my scissors and a slit in the back. I'm going to lay this on top of the shank, and I'm going to capture that paper by inserting the thread through the slit and just barely catching the end of that one end. I'm going to advance the thread beneath it. Okay, I'm going to advance the thread beneath it and above the shank to the eye of the fly and capture the front part of that paper. Flatten it out, and at this point I'm going to get rid of the thread. This is in fact really building a fly as opposed to tying it. Okay. These flies are very small. They're usually about the size of my fingernail on the little finger, or smaller. This is just a caricature or a vague impression of this crab. And I'm going to color this with permanent markers. I'm going to color this with permanent markers in pink, gray, and olive by just spotting the paper and coating the thread on the hook bottom. My next step is to mix 5-minute epoxy, and I'm going to do that on this same pad. This is kind of handy. These are just your little notepads with the adhesive top, and works out to be a nice base for mixing the epoxy, in that when it's done you just more or less fold back and throw away and get rid of the epoxy. Okay. Jeez. No wonder you have dead batteries. We don't need a lot of this. True to what you've been told before, you can't mix this enough. If anything, overmix it. And I'm going to apply a small amount of the epoxy to the top of this form of paper. Coat it evenly, rather thin, and then turn it over and add a good amount to the bottom, kind of pull it in and around the shank of that hook. At this point I'm going to use a length of fine rubber band, and every inch or so I'm going to tie an overhand knot. Pull it tight. And when I do this, it will cause a slight dog leg or a kink in the band. Okay, I'm going to end up with 6 legs, and I'm going to stick these into the wet epoxy in such a way that the bend faces down or to the top of the fly, being that this is an inverted fly at this point. And I'm going to place all 6, 3 on either side of this bottom area. Okay. There's 6 legs. I'm sure somebody's going to tell you that there are 8 or 10 or 7. I'm not really sure, but 6 is enough. Take it from me. I'm going to put 2 claws on this particular fly also, and I'm going to use a regular saddle hackle, and I'm just going to trim it in such a way that I create a crotch on the end, like so. And I'm going to strip back some hackle below that, and I'm going to stick that point into the wet epoxy on the other side. And I'm going to put 2 of these on. And I'm going to coat these with lacquer so that they hold their shape. Okay, to finish this fly, I merely color the legs with spots of brown and olive. And perhaps clip them to length if they're way out of proportion. And you have a little crab fly that's pretty effective. Has a lot of movement in these legs and is a good bass fly in early season.
Well, that's our show. If you'd like more information about these patterns, fly tying materials, or to tell us a good fish story, stop in and see us or drop a note to the Saltwateredge, 559 Thames Street, Newport, Rhode Island, 02840. Our phone number is 1-800-FISH-543. Thanks for watching, and look for the next edition in the Saltwateredge Fly Fishing Video Library.